It was 1880, and the town of Dry Creek was a forgotten bone under a brutal August sun. Dust devils danced past weathered storefronts, and the air hung thick, so dry it seemed to suck the moisture from your lungs. Jack Thornton rode his bay gelding down the center of the street, hat pulled low, his spurs a lonely clink in the oppressive silence. He was a tall man, lean and hard, with a face that rarely showed anything but stoic indifference. The townspeople knew him. Women clutched their baskets closer. Men nodded curtly. Jack Thornton wasn't a man who invited conversation, and everyone was just fine with that. "There he goes again," Martha Henderson whispered, watching from the general store. "Like clockwork every Saturday. Speaks to no one." "Cold as a winter grave," her friend Agnes agreed. "Been here near 5 years now and never a word about why. They say he lost his family back in Kansas, but nobody knows for certain because he won't speak of it." Jack rode past the milliner's shop, his gaze fixed on some distant point, ignoring pretty young Sarah Mills, who was making eyes at him from the window. The heat pressed down like a flat iron. He dismounted outside the mercantile, his movements economical, a man who wasted neither time nor energy. Inside, Sam Polson had his usual order ready: flour, coffee, ammunition, tobacco. Jack paid, loaded the supplies, and emerged back into the sun. That's when it happened. The afternoon stage had arrived, its passengers looking wilted. Among them, a woman stepped down, her movements careful but determined. She was dressed in a traveling dress that had seen better days, but there was something about the way she held herself, back straight, chin lifted, that spoke of pride that circumstances hadn't broken. Jack, who had just mounted his horse, stilled. The woman turned to face the street, and her eyes, gray as storm clouds, swept across the faces of the townspeople with a directness that was almost challenging. Then her gaze found Jack, and time seemed to slow. For the first time in 5 years, something stirred behind the walls he'd built around his heart. Not quite interest, not quite recognition, but something that made him forget for a moment to breathe. The woman held his gaze for a heartbeat longer than propriety dictated. There was something in her eyes that he recognized, something that called to the broken places in his own soul. Then she looked away, adjusted her grip on a small carpet bag, and started toward the hotel with a slight limp. Jack remained frozen, watching her. The entire town was watching him, too. Jack Thornton, who looked through women as if they were made of glass, had actually stopped to stare. What was it about this woman? The answer felt a million miles away. Eleanor Bright, late of Kansas City, pushed through the door of the Dry Creek Hotel, finally allowing her shoulders to slump with exhaustion. She had made it this far. Whatever came next, she would face it with her head high and her secrets held close. Neither she nor Jack could have known that their brief moment of connection on that dusty street would change everything. The desert knows how to wait, and the stars were just starting to appear. And two wounded hearts had just found each other in the vastness of the frontier. That night, the nightmares came for Jack as they always did. He saw their faces again, his wife, Mary, and his children, Thomas and Sarah. Then the flames, the screams, the thunder of hooves as raiders disappeared into the darkness. He woke with a strangled cry, his body drenched in cold sweat. 5 years since he'd failed to protect them. 5 years since he'd been away delivering cattle, only to return to nothing but ashes. The law never found the men responsible. Jack had searched for months, following cold trails until his money ran out, and his soul felt as empty as his saddlebags. That's when he drifted to Dry Creek, bought the abandoned ranch, and built walls around his heart higher than any fence. But this morning, as he went through his morning chores, his mind kept returning to gray eyes and a proud tilt of the chin. He cursed himself for a fool and tried to focus on the work ahead. In town, Eleanor faced her own battles. The hotel was barely worthy of the name, and she had to find work fast. She'd sold everything she owned to pay off her late husband William's debts and buy passage west, but debts to certain men were paid in blood, not coin, and she knew they would come looking eventually. She tried the general store, the boarding house, the schoolhouse. All the answers were the same: no positions available. By noon, her feet ached, and her hope was wearing thin. She found herself standing outside the Brass Bell Saloon, her last option. Through the batwing doors, she could hear rough laughter and the clink of glasses. It was no place for a respectable woman, but respectability didn't fill an empty stomach. A woman named Ruby, with henned hair and a knowing look, watched her from the side entrance. "You lost, miss?" she asked. "I'm looking for work," Eleanor said simply, past the point of pretense. Ruby took her to see the owner, Jake Morrison, a bear of a man with scarred knuckles. He agreed to a trial period, serving drinks and food, nothing more. The pay was minimal, but it included a meal and the possibility of tips. Eleanor had work. It wasn't what she'd hoped for, but it was survival. That evening, the saloon filled with smoke and noise. Cowboys rode in from the surrounding ranches, eager to spend their pay on whiskey and cards. Eleanor navigated between tables, trying to remain invisible while being constantly watched. She was just beginning to think she might survive the evening when trouble walked through the door. Three men swaggered in, already well into their cups. Their leader, a man with a pock-marked face and mean eyes, immediately fixed his attention on Eleanor. "Well, well," he slurred as she approached. "New meat?" His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. "How about you sit down and be friendly like?" The saloon grew quiet. Ruby started forward, but Jake held her back. This was Eleanor's test. Just then, the Batwing doors swung open, and Jack Thornton walked in. He rarely visited the saloon, but he'd needed tobacco, and this had been his only excuse to come back to town. His gaze found Eleanor immediately. He took in the situation in a single glance. Her rigid posture, the man's grip on her wrist, the ugly anticipation in the crowd. Something cold and dangerous stirred in his chest. Jack moved to the bar. "Whiskey," he told Jake, his voice carrying that particular quality that made smart men pay attention. The pockmarked man, not being particularly smart, didn't release Eleanor's wrist. "Mind your own business, cowboy," he snarled. "The lady and I are getting acquainted." Jack knocked back his whiskey, set the glass down with deliberate care, and turned. His hand rested casual-like on his gun belt. His eyes had gone as flat and cold as river stones. "The lady asked you to let go," he said. Jack moved faster than thought. His fist connected with the man's jaw with a crack that echoed through the saloon. The man flew backward, crashing into his companions. Chairs scattered. Patrons scrambled for cover. The three men struggled to their feet, reaching for their guns. "I wouldn't," Jack said softly, his own Colt already clear of its holster and aim steady as stone. "Time to move along." The leader spat blood on the floor and jerked his head toward the door. They left, muttering threats. Jack holstered his gun and turned to Eleanor, who stood frozen with her tray still miraculously balanced. "You hurt?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, but I could have handled it." Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. "I'm sure you could have," he said. "I don't need protecting." She lifted her chin. "Never said you did." He touched the brim of his hat and turned to leave. "But sometimes," he paused at the door, "it doesn't hurt to have backup." He was gone, leaving Eleanor standing there, her heart racing. Ruby appeared at her elbow, grinning. "Well now," the older woman murmured. "Jack Thornton playing knight in shining armor. Wonders never cease." Eleanor busied herself collecting scattered glasses, trying to ignore the heat in her cheeks. She'd come west to escape the entanglements of men and their violence, not to fall under the protection of another. But she couldn't forget the way he'd moved, dangerous and controlled, or the way he'd looked at her, as if seeing past all her carefully constructed walls. Outside, Jack rode home, cursing himself for getting involved. He'd sworn off such foolishness. Sworn off caring what happened to anyone beyond his own borders. But those gray eyes haunted him, along with the proud way she'd insisted she didn't need protection. He pulled his coat tighter against the night wind, trying not to think about how for just a moment in that crowded saloon, he hadn't felt quite so alone. Back in town, Eleanor finally climbed the stairs to her room, exhausted but oddly exhilarated. She'd survived her first night, earned enough in tips to extend her hotel stay, and discovered that perhaps not everyone in Dry Creek was indifferent to a stranger's plight. She allowed herself a moment of hope. Maybe she could build something here, far from the reach of William's creditors. But neither she nor Jack could know that the men from the saloon were already planning their revenge, or that a telegram was even now making its way across the wires, carrying news of a dark-haired woman heading west. The desert kept its secrets, and the stars offered no warnings. For now, there was only the night, and two souls trying to find their way through the darkness, each haunted by what they'd lost. A week passed, then two. Eleanor developed a rhythm at the saloon, deflecting the inevitable advances with a combination of cool politeness and quick feet. But Friday nights were always the worst. On this particular Friday, the crowd was rowdier than usual. She weaved between tables when she felt rough fingers grab at her skirt. Bill Hawkins, a regular brute from the livery stable, was leering up at her. "Come on, sweetheart," he slurred. "Don't be so high and mighty. You're serving drinks in a saloon, not tea at the church social." He made another grab, and his meaty hand closed around her arm. "Let go," she said, her voice steady despite the fear. "Or what?" Hawkins sneered. "Your guardian angel ain't here tonight, is he? That cold-hearted bastard Thornton only comes to town when—" He never finished the sentence. A chair crashed across his shoulders, sending him sprawling. Eleanor stumbled back, her tray clattering to the floor. She found herself looking at Jack Thornton, who was holding the splintered remains of the chair. "Funny thing," Jack said conversationally, his eyes hard as flint. "Seems I picked tonight to come to town after all." Hawkins struggled to his feet, rage twisting his features. "You broke my head, you son of a—" "Your head was already broken," Jack observed. "I just rearranged it some." The saloon went dead quiet. Hawkins swayed on his feet, his hand moving toward the knife on his belt. Jake Morrison's voice boomed from behind the bar. "That's enough, Hawkins! Get out!" Hawkins spat on the floor, but he stumbled toward the door, his friends following. Eleanor knelt to gather the broken glass, her hands shaking. Jack crouched beside her. "You have a talent for finding trouble," he said quietly. "Or it has a talent for finding me," she replied, not meeting his eyes. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." His voice was flat, matter of fact. Men like Hawkins don't understand words. They only understand consequences. Their fingers brushed as they reached for the same shard of glass, and Eleanor jerked back as if burned. She stood abruptly. "I can't keep depending on you to fight my battles." Jack rose slowly, studying her. "Then maybe you should find different battles." "Because working here is a choice I made for the sheer joy of it?" she snapped. "Not everyone has the luxury of hiding away on a ranch, Mr. Thornton. Some of us have to survive however we can." Something shifted in his expression, a recognition of truth. "No," he said finally. "I suppose they don't." He turned to leave, but then paused. "But if surviving means putting yourself in harm's way every night, maybe you need to reconsider your definition of living." Eleanor watched him go. Anger and something else. Something warmer and more dangerous, churning in her stomach. Ruby appeared at her elbow. "That man's got it bad," the older woman observed. "Don't be ridiculous," Eleanor said. But as she worked through the rest of her shift, she found her gaze drawn to the doors, half expecting to see his tall frame silhouetted against the night. When closing time finally came, she walked back to the hotel, moving quickly through the shadows. The confrontation with Hawkins had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. Men like him were exactly why she'd fled Kansas City. She was so focused on reaching the hotel's safety that she didn't notice the figure in the alley until a hand shot out and grabbed her arm. It was one of Hawkins's drinking companions, a weasel-faced man called Shorty. "Hawkins wants a word," he hissed, trying to drag her deeper into the alley. Eleanor's response was pure instinct. She swung her small purse, weighed with her night's earnings, directly into his temple. Shorty staggered, his grip loosening, and she wrenched free. But as she turned to run, she found Hawkins himself blocking her path, his face ugly with drunken rage. "Think you're too good for us, do you?" he snarled. "Well, he ain't here now." Eleanor backed away, her heart pounding. The alley was narrow, walls pressing close. This was how it would end. Then she heard it, the distinctive sound of a hammer being cocked. Hawkins froze, his eyes going wide. "Actually," Jack's voice came from the shadows, cold as winter wind. "I'm here." He stepped into the dim light, his Colt 145 aimed steady at Hawkins's chest. In his other hand, he held a second pistol trained on Shorty. "You boys are going to walk out of this alley and keep walking until you hit the town limits. If I see either of you near Miss Bright again, We won't be having words. We'll be having a funeral. Yours clear?" Hawkins' face went pale. He knew Jack's reputation. Men like that didn't make idle threats. "This ain't over," Hawkins muttered, but he was already backing away. "Yes," Jack said simply. "It is." The two men fled, stumbling over each other in their haste. Jack waited until their footsteps faded before lowering his weapons. He turned to Eleanor, who stood pressed against the alley wall. "You hurt?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "Come on," he said, holstering his guns. "I'll walk you back." Eleanor's legs felt shaky, and she was grateful when Jack offered his arm. She took it without thinking. "How did you know?" she asked as they walked. "Saw Shorty following you from the saloon. Figured Hawkins wouldn't let things lie." He glanced down at her. "You did good with that purse. Quick thinking." "My mother always said a lady should carry coins for emergencies," she said with a shaky laugh. "I don't think she had this in mind." They reached the hotel, and Eleanor reluctantly released his arm. She should go inside, thank him, and end this. But she found herself asking, "Why do you keep saving me?" Jack was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Maybe because I couldn't save the ones who mattered before. Maybe you remind me that not everyone is beyond redemption." The next morning, Eleanor woke to the sound of thunder. A storm was coming. She walked into the lobby of the hotel and found Jake Morrison, the saloon owner, talking to the sheriff. She heard her name, then Kansas City. Her blood ran cold. The men had arrived. She raced back to her room, her mind reeling. She knew what they were looking for, and it wasn't her. It was the deed. The deed to the land in Kansas that William had stolen from them. They thought she had it. She grabbed her carpet bag and a few essentials. She had to get out of Dry Creek, now. She slipped out the back door, her heart pounding. The livery stable. She could get a horse. But as she rounded the corner, she ran straight into two of the men she'd seen in the saloon last night, the ones who had left with Hawkins. They were waiting for her. "Heard you were leaving, Miss Bright," one of them sneered. "Our boss back in Kansas City wants a word." The other man reached for her. Just then, a rider came galloping down the street, kicking up a storm of dust. It was Jack. He saw the scene, his hand already on his gun. But before he could act, a third man stepped out from the shadows, a man she'd never seen before. He was a professional dressed in black, with a long, unblinking scar that ran from his temple to his chin. "You're with them?" Jack called out. The man in black shook his head. "No, I'm with the law." He was an agent from the Pinkerton Detective Agency. The Pinkertons were here, in Dry Creek, looking for her. But why? The agent's gaze was not on her. It was on the two men she had just run into. "You're wanted in Kansas City, boys," he said, "for grand larceny." One of the men pulled his gun. The agent was faster. A single shot rang out, and the man went down. The other man threw his hands in the air. "I'm not with them," he stammered. "The boss, he just hired me for a job." The agent ignored him. He turned to Eleanor. "Eleanor Bright, you are under arrest for the murder of William Bright." Her world went silent. It wasn't just a simple murder charge. It was the man she had been married to, the man who had abandoned her. She felt like she was in a bad dream. She had to get away. Jack stepped between her and the agent. "Wait a minute," he said. "You've got the wrong woman." The agent's eyes narrowed. "Step aside, cowboy. She's a fugitive." A shot rang out from the window of the hotel. The agent gasped, clutching his chest. He staggered and fell. A man with a pockmarked face emerged from the hotel lobby. It was Hawkins. He'd been waiting for her. He told the Pinkertons and Williams' creditors that she was the one with the deed, and now he tried to kill her. And with the Pinkerton agent down, there was only one person left who could save her: Jack. Hawkins looked at Jack, then at Eleanor. "You're with them, aren't you, Thornton?" he snarled. "The ones who want the deed. You're all liars." He ran toward Eleanor, a knife glinting in his hand. Jack moved to intercept him. But before he could, Eleanor screamed, "Stop! Wait!" She pulled a small wooden box from her carpet bag. It was the same one Jack had seen her holding when she first arrived in Dry Creek. "The deed is here," she said, her voice shaking. She opened the box and pulled out a rolled piece of paper. "It's not to land in Kansas. It's to the land right here. The land your ranch sits on, Mr. Thornton. Jack froze. His ranch? The ranch he'd bought 5 years ago? He looked at the paper, then at Eleanor, and a cold dread settled in his gut. William had sold the land to him, but he had no idea he was selling it with a deed that didn't belong to him. William was a con man. He'd sold the same piece of land to 3 different people. The men from Kansas City were here for the land, not for the deed. They were here to reclaim what was theirs. The Pinkerton agent wasn't looking for a murderess. He was looking for a con man. He was looking for William. And Eleanor wasn't a murderer. She was a victim. She'd been trying to escape the men who were chasing her, not because of a murder, but because they wanted the land that William had stolen. The Pinkerton agent, clutching his chest, struggled to sit up. "She's not a murderer," he gasped. "The murder charge was a ruse to get her to come out of hiding. William Bright, my client, faked his own death to get away from his creditors." The men from Kansas City weren't creditors. They were the ones who had paid William for the land, and now they wanted their money back. Eleanor sank to her knees. "He sold the ranch to Jack," she whispered. "He sold it to Jack. He was trying to get away from me, from all of us." She looked at Jack, her gray eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know." Jack reached out, and for the first time he touched her face. "I know," he said. "It's not your fault." He turned to Hawkins. "You've been helping them, haven't you?" he said. Hawkins, seeing his lie unravel, pulled his gun and fired. The bullet went wide. Jack drew his gun and shot him in the arm. Hawkins fell to the ground, screaming. The sheriff, who had been watching from a distance, came running. He cuffed Hawkins and the remaining men. Jack helped the Pinkerton agent to his feet. "William Bright is in Mexico," the agent said. "He's still a fugitive. My mission is to bring him to justice." Jack looked at Eleanor. He was still a fugitive, but he wasn't a murderer. The truth was out. She was safe, for now. But Jack's land wasn't his anymore. It belonged to the men from Kansas City. He had a choice to make. He could fight for the land, or he could let it go. He had already lost so much. What was one more thing? Eleanor looked at Jack, then at the deed in her hands. The deed was a lie. The land was not hers. She had nothing. She had no home. She had no family. She had no money. She had nothing but the clothes on her back and the lie that was the deed. She looked at the man she had come to trust, the man who had saved her again and again, the man who had lost everything, just like her. She knew what she had to do. She had to give him the deed. It was the right thing to do. She had nothing left, but she had him. Eleanor offered the deed to Jack. "It's yours," she said. "You've earned it." Jack looked at the deed, then at her. He knew what she was doing. She was giving up her only claim to a better life. She was giving up everything. He took the deed from her hands. "This is not just a piece of paper," he said. "It's a promise." He looked at the Pinkerton agent. "The land belongs to me," he said. "The deed is a lie, but the land is not." The Pinkerton agent nodded. "The case against Eleanor Bright is closed, but my case is still open. I have to go to Mexico." Jack turned to Eleanor. "I'll ride with you," he said. "I'll help you find him." She shook her head. "No," she said. "I don't want to find him. I want to forget him. I want to start over." Jack looked at her, his eyes filled with a new hope, a hope he hadn't felt in 5 years. He looked at her, then at the deed. He had lost his family. He had lost his home. He had lost his soul. But he had found something else. He had found a reason to live. He had found her. He took her hand. "Then let's start over," he said, "together." He looked at the townspeople who were watching in hushed tones. They had been strangers, but now they were not. They were a part of something bigger, something that was just beginning. Jack looked at Eleanor, then at the town of Dry Creek. The dust devils danced, the sun was still brutal, but something had shifted. Change was coming to Dry Creek. For the first time in 5 years, Jack Thornton found himself curious about what tomorrow might bring. They stood there, hand in hand, the townspeople watching. Two lost souls who had found each other. They had lost everything, but they had found something more. They had found love, and that was enough. They had been through hell and back. They had faced their demons, and they had come out on the other side. They had each other, and that was all that mattered. They were ready to start a life filled with hope, a life filled with love, and a life that was finally theirs. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more, and let us know in the comments. What do you think happened to William Bright?